The baby wouldn't stop pointing at his father's coffin. The truth was unimaginable. Sarah Thompson had been one of those people who radiated warmth. With her bright smile and easy laugh, she was beloved by all, until grief turned her into a shadow of herself. Her husband, James, was the lifeblood of their little family. He worked as a carpenter, crafting beautiful pieces that adorned homes across the county. Their 2-year-old son, Liam, was the apple of both their eyes, a curious, joyful boy with an infectious giggle. But now everything had changed. It happened late one rainy night. James was driving home from a job when his car skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. By the time emergency responders arrived, it was too late. No one could explain why such a careful driver would lose control so suddenly. The police chalked it up to slick roads caused by the storm, but something about the accident never sat right with Sarah. James's death left a void not just in Sarah's heart, but also in Liam's world. Before the crash, Liam was a chatterbox, always babbling nonsense words while pointing at birds or cars or anything that caught his attention. But after his father's passing, he became eerily quiet, retreating into himself. Sarah tried everything to bring him back, playing his favorite songs, reading bedtime stories, but nothing worked. It broke her heart to see her once vibrant child so withdrawn. Then came the funeral. The church was filled with mourners, each carrying flowers or sharing memories of James. Friends hugged Sarah tightly, promising to help her get through this dark time. Neighbors brought casseroles and desserts, piling them high on tables near the entrance. The air smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood. Liam sat silently beside Sarah, clutching his stuffed bear. For most of the service, he didn't make a sound. But as the casket was lowered into the ground during the burial ceremony, something shifted. He began pointing. At first, Sarah thought he was simply pointing at the shiny surface of the coffin, fascinated by its gleam under the gray sky. But then he started crying, loud, wailing sobs that made everyone turn their heads. He reached out desperately toward the casket, straining against Sarah's arms as if trying to climb inside. "Daddy!" he cried over and over again. "Daddy!" Friends and relatives exchanged uneasy glances. One older woman whispered, "Poor thing doesn't understand yet." Another suggested maybe Liam was just overwhelmed by the crowd. They offered comforting words, telling Sarah it was normal for children to react unpredictably to loss. But Sarah noticed something unsettling. Liam only screamed when he was near the coffin. If she moved him away, even slightly, he calmed down. Yet every time she brought him closer, he erupted into tears again, and he kept pointing, not randomly but directly at the casket, foreshadowing unease. That night, after tucking Liam into bed, Sarah couldn't shake the image of her son reaching for the coffin. She replayed the scene in her mind, searching for meaning. Why had he acted that way? What did he see or feel that no one else did? As she drifted off to sleep, exhausted from days of crying and planning, a memory surfaced from deep within her subconscious. It wasn't much, just a fleeting impression, but it gnawed at her. She remembered how, before the accident, James had mentioned needing to tie up loose ends at work. He'd seemed distracted, almost secretive, in the days leading up to his death. When she'd asked what he meant, he brushed it off with a vague smile. "Nothing important," he'd said, "just some old projects I need to finish." Now lying awake in the dark, Sarah realized there was more to James's final days than he'd let on. And whatever it was, it might be connected to the strange behavior of their grieving toddler. Little did she know, the truth was far darker and closer than she could ever imagine. In the weeks following James's funeral, Sarah tried to piece her life back together. She attended grief counseling sessions offered by the church and leaned heavily on her friends for support. But no matter how much she focused on moving forward, Liam remained a constant source of worry. The boy's behavior grew increasingly erratic. At first it seemed like typical toddler antics, pointing at shadows, babbling incoherently, but soon it became clear that something was deeply wrong. Every night without fail, Liam would wake up screaming around 3 a.m., his tiny finger jabbing furiously at the wall opposite his crib. "Daddy!" he'd cry, tears streaming down his face. "Daddy in box!" Sarah would rush to comfort him, holding him close and whispering soothing words until he calmed down. When she asked what he meant about the box, He'd only whimper and bury his head against her chest. By morning, he'd act as if nothing had happened, playing quietly with his toys or watching cartoons. But then came the drawings. One afternoon, while babysitting Liam, Sarah's neighbor found him scribbling furiously with crayons on a sheet of paper. Curious, she brought the finished drawing to Sarah later that day. The image sent chills down her spine. It showed a stick-figure man standing inside what appeared to be a rectangular box. Around the figure were jagged lines, perhaps meant to represent cracks or splinters. In one corner of the page, Liam had scrawled a crude, sun-like shape, its rays stretching toward the box. "What does this mean?" Sarah asked, showing the picture to Liam. He stared at it for a moment before pointing emphatically at the man inside the box. "Daddy," he said firmly. Then he pointed at the sun. "Out!" Sarah felt her stomach twist. Was this just a child's attempt to process his father's death? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? The breaking point came one cold, moonlit night. Sarah had finally managed to get Liam to sleep after another bout of nighttime screaming. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the couch, intending to watch some mindless TV before bed. But as midnight approached, an eerie sound jolted her awake. Knocking. At first, she thought it might be branches tapping against the window pane. Willow Creek was surrounded by dense woods, and wind often stirred the trees into restless motion. But as the sound persisted, slow, deliberate taps, it became clear that it wasn't coming from outside the house. It was coming from outside. Grabbing a flashlight, Sarah cautiously stepped onto the porch. The knocking grew louder, echoing faintly in the distance. Following the noise, she realized it was leading her toward the cemetery where James had been buried. Her heart pounded as she made her way through the darkened graveyard. Graves loomed like silent sentinels under the pale glow of the moon. And then she saw it, the source of the sound. James's grave. Someone or something was rapping gently on the lid of the coffin below. For a moment, Sarah froze, torn between terror and disbelief. This had to be a prank, right? Someone trying to scare her because they knew how vulnerable she was. But who would do such a thing, and why now? Summoning her courage, she called out, "Who's there?" The knocking stopped instantly. Silence enveloped the cemetery, broken only by the rustle of leaves overhead. Shaking, Sarah shone her flashlight over the freshly turned earth. There were no footprints, no signs of disturbance, just the stillness of the night pressing down on her. She hurried home, locking every door and window behind her. That night, she barely slept, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Who or what had been at the grave? And why did it feel like Liam somehow knew? The next morning, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, Sarah decided to investigate James's final days more thoroughly. She started with his workshop, tucked away in the backyard. It was a place she rarely visited, preferring to leave his tools untouched as a shrine to his memory. As she sifted through piles of wood scraps and half-finished projects, she stumbled upon something unexpected, a small wooden box hidden beneath a stack of blueprints. Inside the box was a USB drive and a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the note. It read, "If anything happens to me, check the files. Trust no one." Confused but determined, Sarah plugged the USB drive into her laptop. What she found chilled her to the bone. The drive contained documents detailing financial transactions, names of people she'd never heard of, and cryptic messages referencing the operation. One file stood out, a video recording dated just days before James's death. Taking a deep breath, she pressed play. On the screen, James appeared haggard, his usually warm eyes haunted. "Sarah," he began, his voice trembling, "if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. I'm sorry for everything. You have no idea how much I wanted to protect you and Liam. But I got involved in something dangerous, something I can't undo. They know too much. If they find out I talked..." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "Just remember, I love you both. And whatever you do, don't trust Detective Harris." Before Sarah could process what she'd seen, Liam toddled into the room, clutching his stuffed bear. His wide eyes locked onto the laptop screen. For a split second, he smiled. A genuine, joyful smile. and pointed at the frozen image of James. "Daddy," he said softly. And then, just as suddenly, his expression darkened. He turned and pointed toward the front door, his little finger quivering. Sarah followed his gaze, dread pooling in her stomach. Through the window, she saw headlights pulling up outside the house. A car door slammed shut. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the figure walking up the driveway. Detective Harris. The days that followed Detective Harris's unexpected visit were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even in the safety of her own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light outside the window, sent her heart racing. She began locking Liam's bedroom door at night, though it only made her feel marginally safer. One particularly restless evening, after replaying James's cryptic video message for the 100th time, exhaustion finally overtook her. She fell into a fitful sleep, plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. In the dream, she stood alone in the cemetery under a blood-red moon. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and an unnatural silence pressed against her ears. Then she heard it, a faint voice calling her name. "Sarah." It was James. His voice was strained, desperate, but unmistakably his. Following the sound, she found herself standing before his grave. The coffin lid shifted slightly, as if something, or someone, was trapped inside. "Sarah, please," he pleaded, his muffled cries echoing through the stillness. "You have to help me. I'm not dead." She woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, her pulse hammering in her chest. Her hands trembled as she reached for the lamp beside her bed, casting warm light across the room. It was just a dream, she told herself. Guilt and grief were twisting her mind, making her imagine things that weren't real. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to confront Mark, James's best friend and business partner. They'd been inseparable since childhood, sharing everything from secrets to carpentry projects. If anyone knew what James had gotten himself into, it would be Mark. She tracked him down at his workshop on the outskirts of town. The place smelled of sawdust and varnish, familiar scents that brought back bittersweet memories of James. Mark looked up from sanding a piece of wood when she entered, his face breaking into a weary smile. "Hey, Sarah," he said, setting the tool aside. "How are you holding up?" "I need to talk to you about James," she said without preamble, her voice tight with urgency. "About the night of the accident." Mark's expression faltered for the briefest moment before he schooled it back into concern. "Of course, anything you need." She recounted the strange events since the funeral, the knocking at the cemetery, Liam's drawings, the USB drive, and James's ominous warning about Detective Harris. Mark listened intently, his brow furrowed, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled her, something guarded. When she finished, he sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Sarah, I know this has been hard on you. Losing James, it's devastating, but maybe your mind is playing tricks on you. You've been through so much." "That's not an answer," she snapped, frustration bubbling over. "James left me those files for a reason. He said they'd know too much. Who's they? What did he get mixed up in?" Mark hesitated, glancing toward the door as if checking to see if anyone was listening. When he spoke again, his tone was softer, almost apologetic. "I don't know all the details, okay? James mentioned some kind of debt he owed, money stuff, but he swore he was handling it. Said it was nothing to worry about." "Money," Sarah echoed, incredulous. "That doesn't explain why someone would tamper with his car or why Liam keeps pointing at his coffin like—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Mark stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Listen, I love James like a brother. Whatever trouble he was in, I promise you, it's over now. You need to focus on taking care of yourself and Liam. Let the past stay buried." His words struck a nerve. Let the past stay buried? Wasn't that exactly what everyone wanted her to do? To move on, to forget. As she left the workshop, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was hiding something. His evasiveness gnawed at her, fueling her growing suspicion that James's death wasn't the tragic accident everyone claimed it was. On the drive home, Sarah replayed the conversation in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed. That's when it hit her. Mark had avoided answering one crucial question. If James's troubles were truly resolved, then why had he recorded that video message? Why warn her about Detective Harris? Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, startling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. For your son's sake." Her breath caught in her throat. The message was unsigned, but its meaning was clear. Someone was watching her, and they didn't want her to find out the truth. Sarah knew she couldn't handle this alone. Her instincts screamed that James's death wasn't an accident, and the cryptic warning from the anonymous text only deepened her resolve. She needed someone who could dig deeper without raising suspicion. Someone outside the tight-knit community of Willow Creek. That's when she turned to a private investigator named Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was recommended by a coworker who swore she could uncover secrets buried 6 feet under. Sarah hesitated at first. Hiring a PI felt drastic, almost paranoid. But after yet another sleepless night spent listening to Liam mutter, "Daddy," in his sleep, she made the call. Evelyn arrived the next morning, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. After hearing Sarah's story, she wasted no time getting to work. While Evelyn combed through police reports and financial records, Sarah tried to keep things as normal as possible for Liam. But the boy's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began pointing at random objects around the house, a chair, a lamp, even the refrigerator, as if they were somehow connected to James. Each time he'd whisper, "Daddy," or mimic knocking sounds with his tiny fists. One afternoon, while Sarah was folding laundry, Liam pointed at the wall behind her and said, "Daddy here." Her blood ran cold. There was nothing there but plaster and paint. "Liam," she said gently, kneeling beside him, "where is Daddy?" He stared at her for a long moment, his big brown eyes filled with confusion. Then he reached out and touched her cheek, murmuring, "Box." The word sent shivers down her spine. Whatever was happening, it was clear that Liam wasn't just grieving. He was trying to tell her something. Meanwhile, Evelyn uncovered disturbing details about James's final days. The financial transactions on the USB drive traced back to a shell company linked to a notorious loan shark operating in the neighboring city. According to Evelyn, James had taken out a substantial sum months earlier, far more than any legitimate carpentry project would require. But the real bombshell came when Evelyn reviewed the accident report. The official cause of death was listed as a single-car crash due to wet road conditions. However, upon closer inspection, Evelyn noticed inconsistencies. Witnesses reported seeing brake lights flicker erratically before the car veered off the road. And despite the severity of the impact, the airbags hadn't deployed. "It doesn't add up," Evelyn told Sarah during one of their late-night meetings. "Someone tampered with his car. This wasn't an accident. It was sabotage." The revelation left Sarah reeling. Who would want to harm James? And why go through such elaborate measures to make it look like an accident? Evelyn also dug into Detective Harris's background. What she found was alarming. Harris had been quietly reassigned multiple times over the years, often following allegations of corruption. Though none of the claims stuck, the pattern suggested he might not be above bending the rules, or worse, for the right price. "Do you think Harris was involved?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Evelyn admitted, "but I'd bet my career that someone doesn't want us poking around." One night, unable to sleep, Sarah decided to revisit James's workshop. If there were more clues hidden among his belongings, she needed to find them. Armed with a flashlight, she sifted through drawers and shelves, searching for anything unusual. Then she saw it, a loose floorboard near the back corner of the room. Heart racing, she pried it open and discovered a small dusty journal tucked inside. Flipping through its pages, she realized it was James's personal diary. The entries revealed a man trapped in a nightmare of his own making. James wrote about borrowing money to fund a secret project, a prototype for a revolutionary, eco-friendly building material. He believed it could change the industry forever. But when the loan shark demanded repayment sooner than expected, James panicked. He confided in Mark, hoping his best friend could help him stall the debt collectors. Instead, Mark betrayed him, selling the prototype to a rival contractor. The final entry chilled Sarah to her core. "They know I have proof. If anything happens to me, check the files. Trust no one. Not even Mark. As dawn broke, Sarah sat staring at the journal, tears streaming down her face. James hadn't died because of gambling debts or bad luck. He'd been murdered to silence him, and now whoever killed him thought they'd silenced her too. But they were wrong. With Evelyn's help, Sarah devised a plan to expose the truth. Using the evidence from the USB drive in James's journal, she arranged a meeting with the local news station. She intended to go public with everything she'd uncovered, knowing full well it could put her life and Liam's in danger. Before she could act, however, Detective Harris showed up at her door. This time he wasn't alone. Evelyn's investigation reached a breaking point when she uncovered evidence so horrifying it left Sarah physically ill. Late one evening, Evelyn called Sarah to her office, her face pale and drawn. "I found something you need to see," Evelyn said, gesturing for Sarah to sit down. On the desk in front of them lay a stack of documents, photographs, and lab reports. Evelyn began explaining, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "James didn't die instantly in the crash," she started. "According to the coroner's preliminary notes, he was unconscious but still breathing when first responders arrived at the scene. He was rushed to the hospital, or rather the morgue." Sarah's stomach churned. The morgue? Why would they take him there if he was alive? "That's where things get complicated," Evelyn replied, pulling out a photo of the wreckage. "Look at this dent on the driver's side door. It doesn't match the tree James supposedly hit. This damage is consistent with another vehicle ramming into him before the crash." Sarah stared at the image, her hands trembling. Someone had deliberately forced James off the road. "And then there's this," Evelyn continued, sliding over a toxicology report. "Traces of sedatives were found in his bloodstream, drugs that wouldn't have been administered by medical personnel. Whoever did this drugged him beforehand, ensuring he couldn't fight back." "But how does that explain what happened afterward?" Sarah whispered, dreading the answer. Evelyn hesitated, as if bracing herself for Sarah's reaction. "There's more. An anonymous tip came in yesterday. A former employee at the morgue who claims James showed signs of life after being declared dead. They say his body was already prepped for burial when someone noticed slight movement, a twitch of his fingers, maybe a faint heartbeat. But instead of reporting it, they covered it up." Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "Covered it up? You mean—" "They buried him alive," Evelyn finished grimly. "That's why Liam keeps pointing at the coffin. That's why he screams, 'Daddy in box.' Somehow he knows." The revelation shattered Sarah. For weeks she'd questioned her sanity, wondering if grief and guilt were driving her to imagine conspiracies. But now, faced with undeniable proof, she realized the unimaginable truth. James had suffered unspeakably before his final moments. And yet, amidst the horror, clarity emerged. Every strange behavior Liam exhibited, the drawings, the nighttime wailing, the incessant pointing, it all made sense now. Her son wasn't haunted by memories of his father's death. He was reacting to something far darker. "Liam knew," Sarah murmured, tears streaming down her face. "He knew Daddy wasn't really gone." Evelyn nodded solemnly. "Kids have an uncanny way of picking up on things adults miss. Maybe he sensed something during the wake, or maybe—" She trailed off, unwilling to speculate further. Sarah clenched her fists, anger burning through her grief. "We can't let this stand. Whoever did this, they thought they could silence James forever, but I won't let them win." Armed with Evelyn's findings, Sarah prepared to go public. She contacted a trusted journalist at the local news station, providing copies of the evidence along with a heartfelt plea for justice. The story broke the following morning, sending shockwaves through Willow Creek. Residents were outraged. How could such a monstrous act happen in their quiet town? Calls for an investigation into the morgue and the circumstances surrounding James's death flooded law enforcement offices. Even Detective Harris, once untouchable, became the subject of intense scrutiny. But not everyone welcomed the exposure. Later that day, as Sarah packed Liam's toys in preparation for leaving town temporarily, she heard a knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, she froze. Standing on her porch was Mark, his face contorted with rage. "You shouldn't have done this," he snarled, barging inside before she could react. "You don't know what you've unleashed." Get out of my house, Sarah shouted, clutching Liam protectively. I know what you did, Mark. You betrayed James. You sold him out. Mark shook his head, his expression shifting from fury to desperation. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I was just trying to save myself. They promised me immunity if I handed over the prototype. I never meant for James to get hurt. Then why didn't you stop them? Sarah demanded, her voice cracking. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Before Mark could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars screeched to a halt outside, their flashing lights illuminating the living room. Officers poured into the house, arresting Mark on charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. As they led him away, Sarah sank to the floor, holding Liam close. Though justice was finally within reach, the weight of everything she'd learned pressed heavily on her shoulders. Weeks later, James's body was exhumed as part of the ongoing investigation. While the autopsy confirmed the grim reality of his fate, Sarah found solace in knowing the truth and in ensuring those responsible would pay for their crimes. Detective Harris resigned amid mounting allegations of corruption, while the loan shark and his associates faced charges for their roles in James's murder. Even the morgue staff involved in the cover-up were held accountable, sparking widespread reforms in the county's forensic practices. For Sarah, healing was a slow process. She threw herself into raising Liam, determined to honor James's memory by building a brighter future for their son. And though Liam still occasionally pointed at random objects or whispered "Daddy" in his sleep, his smiles returned. One small step toward reclaiming the joy stolen from their lives. The confrontation with Mark came sooner than Sarah expected. After the anonymous tip about James being buried alive, she realized time was running out. Whoever had orchestrated this nightmare wasn't going to let her expose the truth without a fight. With Evelyn's help, Sarah arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing funeral expenses, a pretext to get Mark alone and confront him directly. She chose the old barn on the outskirts of town where James and Mark used to work together. It felt fitting. The place was filled with memories of happier times, though now its weathered beams seemed to echo the weight of betrayal. When Mark arrived, he looked nervous but tried to mask it with forced casualness. "What's this about, Sarah? You said you needed my help." "I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. She stepped closer, holding up James's journal. "This is what I need your help with. Explain this." Mark's face paled as he glanced at the notebook. For a moment he was silent, his jaw tightening. Then with a resigned sigh, he sank onto a nearby stack of wooden planks. "Sarah, I didn't want it to come to this," he began, his voice trembling. "You have no idea how sorry I am." "Sorry for what?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "For killing James? For letting him be buried alive?" "No," Mark shot back, his eyes wide with panic. "I didn't kill him. I swear. But I made mistakes. Terrible ones." He hesitated, staring at his hands as if seeing blood on them. Finally he spoke, his words spilling out in a torrent of guilt and regret. "James found out about some questionable deals I'd been making behind his back. Stuff that could have gotten us both in serious trouble if anyone found out. He was furious, said he was going to go public, blow everything wide open. I panicked. I thought if I could just scare him into backing off." Sarah's breath hitched. "So you sabotaged his car?" Mark nodded miserably. "I paid someone to tamper with the brakes. Not enough to kill him, just enough to make him crash and think twice about crossing me. But when I heard he survived the wreck," his voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. "I didn't know what to do. I couldn't risk him waking up and telling everyone what he knew. So I called Harris, he owed me a favor, and we faked the report. We made it look like an accident." "And the morgue?" Sarah pressed, her voice icy. "Did you know they were going to bury him alive?" "No," Mark exclaimed, tears streaming down his face. "I swear I had no idea. All I did was pay Harris to keep things quiet. If I'd known, if I'd even suspected—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "God, I never meant for any of this to happen. James was my best friend, my brother." Sarah stared at him, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. Grief, anger, disgust. This man who had once shared laughter and dreams with James had betrayed him in the worst possible way, all because of greed and fear. "You destroyed my family," she said quietly, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You took Liam's father away from him. And for what? To protect yourself?" Mark didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Before Sarah could decide her next move, the sound of approaching sirens pierced the air. Moments later, police officers swarmed the barn, guns drawn. Evelyn stood among them, her expression grim but resolute. "It's over, Mark," she said firmly. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder." As the officers cuffed him, Mark offered no resistance. He simply hung his head, sobbing uncontrollably. Watching him being led away, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Justice would be served, but it wouldn't bring James back. In the weeks that followed, Sarah focused on healing, not just for herself, but for Liam. She poured her energy into creating a safe, loving environment for her son, determined to shield him from the darkness that had consumed their lives. Though the scars of loss would always remain, she vowed to honor James's memory by living fully and fearlessly. One evening, as she tucked Liam into bed, he reached out and touched her cheek, his little face lighting up with a smile. "Daddy here," he whispered, pointing toward the window. Sarah followed his gaze, half expecting to see something extraordinary. Instead, she saw only the fading light of sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Yet somehow, in that moment, she felt James's presence too, a quiet reassurance that love endures, even in the face of unimaginable pain. The decision to exhume James's coffin was not made lightly. For Sarah, it felt like tearing open an old wound, one that might never fully heal. But she knew it was necessary. The world needed to see the truth, no matter how painful or horrifying. With Evelyn's help, Sarah filed a formal petition with the court, citing overwhelming evidence of foul play and a misdiagnosed time of death. The judge, moved by the gravity of the case and the public outcry sparked by the news report, granted permission for the exhumation. On the appointed day, a somber crowd gathered at the cemetery. Friends, neighbors, reporters, and even strangers from neighboring towns stood shoulder to shoulder, united by morbid curiosity and shared grief. The air was heavy with tension as workers carefully unearthed the casket. When the lid was finally pried open, silence fell over the crowd. Inside lay James, his body still dressed in the suit he'd been buried in. But it was the condition of the coffin's interior that drew gasps of horror. Deep scratches marred the polished wood near the lid, some so forceful they splintered the surface. Fingernail fragments clung to the edges, evidence of desperate attempts to escape. His hands were frozen in claw-like positions, fingers bent as if reaching for freedom even in death. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She had known the truth intellectually, but seeing it with her own eyes was devastating. Around her, murmurs rippled through the crowd, whispers of disbelief, sorrow, and outrage. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't deny what they were witnessing. James had fought for his life until his final breath. The exhumation became national news overnight. Reporters descended on Willow Creek, eager to uncover every detail of the tragedy. Local authorities launched a full-scale investigation into the circumstances surrounding James's death, leading to arrests that sent shockwaves through the community. Detective Harris was formally charged with corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Mark, already behind bars, faced additional charges for his role in staging the accident and covering up the truth. The loan shark and his associates were extradited to face trial for their involvement in James's murder. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within the town itself. What had once been a close-knit community, bound by tradition and trust, now grappled with the harsh reality of betrayal and complicity. Neighbors questioned how such atrocities could happen under their noses, vowing to hold each other, and those in power, accountable moving forward. For Sarah, the revelations brought both closure and heartache. Knowing the truth didn't erase the pain of losing James, but it allowed her to begin healing. She started attending support groups for victims of violent crime, finding solace in shared experiences and newfound friendships. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, not just for herself, but for Liam. As weeks turned into months, Sarah noticed subtle changes in Liam's behavior. He still spoke about his father occasionally, pointing at random objects and whispering, "Daddy." But the frantic urgency, the cries of distress, had faded. Instead, his words carried a sense of warmth, almost as if he were sharing happy memories rather than haunting ones. One afternoon, while playing in the backyard, Liam suddenly stopped chasing butterflies and looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. "Daddy, okay," he said softly, nodding as though reassuring himself. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she knelt beside him. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "Daddy's okay now." Though James was gone, his presence lingered. In the love Sarah poured into raising Liam, in the laughter that slowly returned to their home, and in the lessons learned from his tragic fate. His fight for life, however brief, had ignited a fire in those left behind, a determination to honor his memory by living courageously and authentically. That winter, Sarah planted a tree in James's memory near the spot where they used to picnic as a family. Beneath its branches, she scattered wildflower seeds, imagining the vibrant blooms that would emerge in spring. As she worked, Liam played nearby, giggling as he chased leaves swirling in the breeze. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Sarah paused to watch her son. In that moment, she realized something profound. Grief wasn't something you got over. It was something you carried with you, woven into the fabric of your soul. But it didn't have to define you. You could choose to let it weigh you down, or use it to lift others up. As the investigation unfolded and the truth about James's death came to light, Sarah found herself reflecting on Liam's behavior in the weeks following the funeral. His fixation on the coffin, his nighttime wailing, and his insistence that "Daddy in box" had seemed incomprehensible at first. A child's confused reaction to loss. But now, with the horrifying revelations laid bare, it was clear there was more to it. To better understand, Sarah sought out Dr. Evelyn Monroe, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and grief. Dr. Monroe listened intently as Sarah recounted Liam's actions, the pointing, the drawings, the eerie accuracy of his words. When Sarah finished, the doctor nodded thoughtfully. "Children are incredibly intuitive," Dr. Monroe explained. "They perceive things differently than adults do. While we rely on logic and reason, children often respond to emotions, energy, or even unspoken truths around them." She went on to describe how young children, especially those as sensitive as Liam, can sometimes act as conduits for unresolved feelings tied to traumatic events. Liam wasn't just grieving your husband's absence. He was responding to something deeper. Perhaps he sensed the injustice of what happened, or maybe he picked up on residual emotional energy surrounding the coffin. His fixation was his way of trying to communicate the truth, even if he didn't fully understand it himself. Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. All this time, she'd assumed Liam's behavior stemmed from confusion or fear. But what if he'd been trying to tell her all along? What if, in his own limited way, he'd known James wasn't truly gone and that something was terribly wrong? Dr. Monroe encouraged Sarah to view Liam's actions not as random quirks, but as meaningful attempts to process the tragedy. When Liam pointed at the coffin or whispered, "Daddy," he wasn't imagining things. He was connecting to something real. Whether it was his father's lingering presence or the echoes of James's final struggle, Liam felt it deeply. And because he couldn't articulate it verbally, he used gestures, drawings, and sounds to express what he couldn't put into words. This insight gave Sarah a new perspective on her son's role in uncovering the truth. It wasn't mere coincidence that Liam had fixated on the coffin or drawn pictures of a man trapped inside a box. He had been trying to guide her toward the answers she desperately needed. In his innocence, he had become an unwitting advocate for justice, a tiny voice speaking volumes in a world determined to stay silent. Armed with this understanding, Sarah approached Liam's healing journey with renewed purpose. She began incorporating storytelling and art into their daily routine, encouraging him to express his thoughts and feelings freely. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Liam drew another picture, a stick-figure family holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. "What's this one about, buddy?" Sarah asked gently, pointing to the figures. Liam smiled, tapping the figure in the middle. "Daddy happy." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she hugged him close. For the first time since James's death, she allowed herself to believe that peace was possible, not just for her, but for Liam too. Though the scars of loss would always remain, they could learn to live alongside them, finding beauty in the memories and strength in each other. In the months that followed, Sarah made it her mission to honor James's memory by fostering resilience in their son. She enrolled Liam in a preschool program where he thrived, making friends and rediscovering the joy of childhood. At home, she created a memory wall filled with photos, artwork, and mementos celebrating James's life. Beneath the tree planted in his honor, she placed a small plaque inscribed with a quote James had once loved. "Even in darkness, love finds a way to shine." For Sarah, these words encapsulated everything James had stood for and everything she hoped to pass on to Liam. Through love, courage, and unwavering determination, they would carry James's legacy forward, ensuring his story ended not in tragedy, but in triumph. And though Liam's fascination with pointing and whispering faded over time, Sarah knew his role in uncovering the truth would forever be etched in her heart, as undeniable proof that even the smallest voices can make the loudest impact. The arrest of Mark marked a turning point in the case, bringing a measure of accountability to the tragedy that had shattered Sarah's life. Charged with manslaughter, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, Mark faced a trial that captivated the nation. The courtroom was packed each day with reporters, townsfolk, and victims' rights advocates eager to see justice served. During the proceedings, damning evidence emerged: surveillance footage showing Mark meeting with the loan shark, text messages detailing plans to tamper with James's car, and testimony from Detective Harris implicating him in the cover-up. Most harrowing of all were the photos of the coffin's interior: the scratches, the splintered wood, the fragments of James's nails, that left jurors visibly shaken. In his defense, Mark claimed he never intended for James to die. "I wanted to scare him, not kill him," he sobbed on the stand. "I thought I could fix everything after the crash. I didn't know they'd bury him alive." But the jury wasn't swayed. After days of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Mark was sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole, a punishment Sarah felt was long overdue. Though the sentence brought some relief, Sarah knew no amount of jail time could undo the damage done. James was gone, and nothing could bring him back. Still, she took comfort in knowing the truth had finally come to light, and that those responsible would pay for their crimes. Channeling her grief into action, Sarah became an outspoken advocate for reforming death declaration protocols and improving transparency in forensic practices. She partnered with organizations dedicated to preventing wrongful burials, sharing James's story to raise awareness about the dangers of misdiagnosis and negligence. Her efforts led to significant changes at both local and state levels. New legislation required mandatory second opinions before declaring deaths in cases involving trauma or suspicious circumstances. Morgues implemented stricter safeguards, including routine checks for signs of life prior to embalming or burial. And law enforcement agencies launched investigations into corruption within their ranks, ensuring officers like Detective Harris couldn't abuse their power again. Sarah also founded James's Light, a nonprofit organization aimed at supporting families affected by wrongful deaths and advocating for systemic change. Through fundraisers, community events, and educational campaigns, she turned her pain into purpose, honoring James's memory by helping others avoid the same heartbreak. While advocacy work gave Sarah a renewed sense of purpose, true healing came from within. She learned to embrace her grief rather than fight it, recognizing it as a testament to the love she shared with James. Therapy sessions helped her process the trauma, while journaling allowed her to reflect on her journey and celebrate small victories along the way. Liam, too, began to heal. His once erratic behavior softened as he grew older, though he still spoke fondly of Daddy during quiet moments. One evening, as they sat together under the tree planted in James's memory, Liam handed Sarah a drawing. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a shining sun, one tall, one medium-sized, and one tiny. "Us," he said simply, pointing to the figures. "Daddy watches." Sarah smiled through tears, pulling him close. "Yes, sweetheart, Daddy always watches." Years later, when asked how she found the strength to persevere, Sarah often quoted James's favorite saying, "Even in darkness, love finds a way to shine." For her, those words embodied the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love to overcome even the deepest sorrow. Through her advocacy work, Sarah ensured James's legacy lived on, not just as a victim of injustice, but as a symbol of hope and transformation. And through her unwavering devotion to Liam, she proved that love could conquer fear, lighting the path forward for generations to come. Beneath the towering branches of the memorial tree, surrounded by wildflowers and laughter, Sarah finally found peace. Though James was gone, his presence remained. In the warmth of the sun, the rustle of leaves, and the boundless love of a mother and son who refused to let tragedy define them. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays across the backyard where Sarah sat on a weathered wooden bench. The air carried the faint scent of blooming wildflowers, a reminder of spring's quiet resilience. Beside her, Liam played happily in the grass, chasing butterflies and giggling as they flitted just out of reach. It had been months since the nightmare began to unravel, and though scars remained, life had started to feel lighter. Sarah no longer woke in the middle of the night clutching her phone, dreading another cryptic message or knock at the door. The house, once filled with shadows and unanswered questions, now echoed with laughter and warmth. As she watched Liam, something remarkable happened. He stopped mid-chase, his little face lighting up with an expression so serene it took her breath away. Turning to her, he smiled, the kind of pure, unburdened smile only a child could give, and said softly, "Daddy happy now." Sarah froze, her heart swelling with emotion. For weeks after James's death, Liam's words had been tinged with confusion and longing. Daddy in box, Daddy here. But this was different. There was no sadness, no desperation, just peace. Tears welled in her eyes as she knelt beside him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of conviction. "Daddy's happy now." In that moment, Sarah felt it too, a profound sense of closure she hadn't known was possible. James's suffering was over, his truth laid bare for the world to see. And while his absence would always leave a void, his love endured. In the memories they cherished, the lessons they passed on, and the bond between mother and son that grew stronger with each passing day. Liam wriggled free from her arms, grinning as he ran back toward the flowers. Sarah stayed there, watching him play beneath the spreading branches of the tree planted in James's memory. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above, and for a fleeting second, she swore she heard it, a soft laugh, warm and familiar, carried on the wind. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. When she opened them again, the yard was bathed in late afternoon light, and Liam was pointing skyward, his tiny finger tracing the path of a bird soaring high above. "Look, Mama!" he exclaimed, his voice bright with wonder. "Birdie flying!" Sarah smiled through her tears, nodding as she rose to join him. "Yes, baby, flying free." And together, under the vast expanse of blue sky, they stood, two hearts bound by love, finding joy in the present while honoring the past. James's journey may have ended, but his legacy lived on in their smiles, their laughter, and the promise of brighter days ahead.